All right, let's start. Number 8. The Man Who Gave Interviews. In March 1994, American television journalist Sam Donaldson traveled to Bariloche, a picturesque ski resort town in the Argentine Andes, to interview a retired German expatriate named Erich Priebke. Priebke was not hiding. He was not living under a false name. He was listed in the local phone book, a member of the town's German Cultural Association, and had been operating a delicatessen in the same community for nearly 5 decades. Donaldson knocked on his door. Priebke answered. The camera was rolling. What Donaldson knew, and what Priebke apparently had stopped worrying about, was that this retired shopkeeper was the SS Hauptsturmführer, who had personally commanded the Argentine Caves massacre in Rome on March 24, 1944. That afternoon, 335 Italian civilians, including 75 Jews and a 15-year-old boy, were executed in reprisal for a partisan attack. Priebke had not only overseen the operation, he had personally checked names off a list and shot 2 of the victims himself. It was one of the most documented war crimes committed on Italian soil. What makes Priebke's case so brazen, so almost insulting in its arrogance, is that he made no meaningful attempt to disappear. He entered Argentina in 1948 through the Odessa network and Vatican rat lines that moved hundreds of former SS officers out of Europe. But while others changed their names, their faces, their continents, Priebke simply moved to Bariloche and stayed, using his real name, for 46 years. He joined civic organizations. He gave the interview. He confirmed everything. The ABC News broadcast aired in 1994 and caused immediate international outrage. Argentine federal police arrested Priebke shortly after. Italy filed for extradition, which was granted after a protracted legal battle. Italian courts convicted him of his role in the massacre in 1998, sentencing him to life imprisonment. Given his age, the sentence was served under house arrest in Rome. He appealed repeatedly, arguing he had only followed orders, a defense the tribunals dismissed as comprehensively as it had been dismissed at Nuremberg 50 years earlier. Erich Priebke died on October 11, 2013, in Rome, aged 100, still under house arrest, still insisting he bore no personal guilt. He had lived so long without consequence that he appeared to have genuinely forgotten that consequence remained possible. The reckoning, when it came, arrived not through any intelligence operation or years of meticulous hunting. It arrived because a journalist knocked on a door, and a deluded old man answered it. Number 7. The commandant who kept his name. In February 1967, Simon Wiesenthal, the Austrian Holocaust survivor who had dedicated his post-war life to hunting Nazi fugitives, received a tip from a contact in Brazilian law enforcement. The tip stated that a man named Franz Stangl was employed at a Volkswagen assembly plant in São Paulo. He was working regular hours, living with his family in a residential neighborhood, and had been doing so under his own name for 16 years. Wiesenthal passed the information to the West German government. The arrest followed within days. Franz Stangl was not a minor functionary. He was the commandant of Treblinka, the extermination camp in occupied Poland, where, between 1942 and 1943, historians and the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial Authority estimate that between 700,000 and 900,000 Jewish men, women, and children were murdered. Before Treblinka, Stangl had served as commandant of Sobibor, another Operation Reinhard death camp. He was, by any measure of documented evidence, one of the most prolific mass killers of the entire war. He had not hidden, he had simply relocated. Stangl escaped Austria in 1948 using the same rat lines that moved so many others, traveling first through Rome with the assistance of Bishop Alois Hudal, a Vatican official who helped numerous SS men acquire false documentation. From Rome, he moved to Damascus, where he worked for the Syrian government. In 1951, he moved his entire family to Brazil and eventually secured work at Volkswagen in São Paulo. He registered under his real name. He made no effort to conceal his identity, apparently calculating that the scale of his crimes placed him beyond individual pursuit. That calculation was catastrophically wrong. West German authorities extradited Stangl in 1967. His trial in Dusseldorf began in 1969 and concluded on December 22, 1970, with a conviction for co-responsibility in the murder of approximately 400,000 people, the largest number for which a court could establish direct documentary evidence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Journalist Gita Sereni conducted extensive interviews with him in prison, later published as Into That Darkness, in which Stangl finally admitted his guilt in the final hours before his death. Franz Stangl died of heart failure on June 28, 1971, 6 months after sentencing. He had spent 16 years in Brazil, so comfortable and so certain of his invisibility that the thought of genuine pursuit apparently never disturbed him. When a man oversees the systematic murder of nearly 1 million human beings, perhaps he begins to believe himself beyond the reach of any earthly reckoning. Stangl discovered, with very little time left to reflect on the discovery, that he was not. Number 6. Hidden by the people hunting him. In the spring of 1972, French Nazi hunters Beate and Serge Klarsfeld made a public announcement that shook the international community. The man known as Klaus Barbie, the former head of the Gestapo in Lyon, France, one of the most wanted war criminals in Western Europe, had been located. He was living in La Paz, Bolivia, under the name Klaus Altmann. He had been there for years, and the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, along with the U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps, had known where he was and had, for a period, been paying him. Klaus Barbie had earned his reputation with cold-blooded thoroughness. As Gestapo chief in Lyon from 1942 to 1944, he personally tortured prisoners in the basement of the Hotel Terminus, his headquarters. He ordered the deportation of thousands of French Jews and resistance members to Auschwitz. Most notoriously, on April 6, 1944, he authorized the roundup and deportation of 44 Jewish children, sheltering at an orphanage in the village of Izieu. None of the children survived. French courts had tried and condemned him to death in absentia, twice in 1952 and 1954. The reason Barbie had not been captured sooner was not investigative failure. Beginning in 1947, U.S. Army Counterintelligence Corps officers had recruited Barbie as an anti-communist informant. They found his methods useful and his contacts valuable. In 1951, the CIC actively assisted him in escaping to Bolivia via South American rat lines, fully aware of his wartime record. When French investigators came looking in the late 1940s, American officials deliberately misdirected them. The United States government formally acknowledged this assistance in 1983, and the Reagan administration issued a formal apology to the French government. Bolivia refused extradition requests throughout the 1970s, but following a change in government, Bolivian authorities expelled Barbie to France in January 1983. His trial in Lyon, one of the most significant war crimes proceedings in post-war French legal history, began in May 1987. He was convicted of crimes against humanity on July 4, 1987, and sentenced to life imprisonment. The conviction specifically cited the Izieu children as evidence of his systematic, calculated participation in genocide. Klaus Barbie died of leukemia in Lyon's St. Joseph prison on September 25, 1991. His case remains one of the most inexorable indictments not only of a war criminal, but of the institutional choices that allowed him to remain free for decades. The most chilling detail is not what he did in Lyon. It is that the people who should have been hunting him were, for years, the people protecting him. Number 5. The mayor of Majdanek, hiding in Queens. In 1964, Simon Wiesenthal cross-referenced a name from Majdanek concentration camp records with immigration documents and traced it to a residential street in Maspeth, a quiet neighborhood in the Queens borough of New York City. The name belonged to a woman now calling herself Hermine Ryan, a retired housewife married to an American citizen named Russell Ryan. Wiesenthal passed his findings to the New York Times. Reporter Joseph Lelyveld traveled to Queens, knocked on the door of a modest home, and asked Hermine Ryan if she had served as a guard at Majdanek. She said yes. Then she offered him coffee. Hermine Braunsteiner had been one of the most feared figures inside Ravensbrück and Majdanek concentration camps. At Majdanek, where she served as a guard supervisor, survivor testimony documented her kicking prisoners to death with steel-capped boots, earning her the name the Stomping Mare. She personally participated in the selection of women and children for the gas chambers on multiple occasions documented in camp records held at the Majdanek State Museum in Lublin, Poland. She was not a peripheral figure. She was a methodical, direct participant in mass murder. After the war, Braunsteiner was briefly tried in Austria in 1948 and served a short sentence for brutality, a conviction that treated her crimes as ordinary assault. She was released, immigrated to Canada in 1948, then moved to the United States in 1959, married Russell Ryan, and became a naturalized American citizen. For 15 years, she lived in suburban Queens, entirely unremarkable, entirely comfortable. Her neighbors knew nothing. The United States Immigration and Naturalization Service knew nothing. She had, by every measure, simply walked away. The Lelyveld article changed everything. A legal process that took nearly a decade followed. In 1971, a U.S. federal court revoked Hermine Braunsteiner Ryan's citizenship, making her the first person in American history to be stripped of U.S. citizenship, specifically for Nazi war crimes. She was extradited to West Germany in August 1973. The Düsseldorf Majdanek trial, one of the longest proceedings in German legal history, concluded on June 30th, 1981, with a conviction and a sentence of life imprisonment. She was released in 1996 on humanitarian grounds due to deteriorating health and died in 1999. How many other perpetrators lived out comfortable American lives, tending their gardens in ordinary neighborhoods, while the survivors of their crimes rebuilt shattered lives on the other side of the Atlantic? Braunsteiner Ryan's case offered a damning, inexorable answer, more than anyone wanted to believe, and almost certainly more than were ever found. Number 4. The architect of the gas van. In 1962, prosecutors in West Germany issued an international arrest warrant for SS Standartenführer Walter Rauff, the senior officer credited in Nuremberg documentation with overseeing the development and operational deployment of mobile gas vans, sealed trucks that pumped carbon monoxide exhaust into a locked compartment to kill the occupants. Historians and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum estimate these vehicles killed between 100,000 and 200,000 people across Eastern Europe and North Africa between 1941 and 1943. Rauff was living in Punta Arenas, Chile. Chilean authorities received the warrant and declined to act. Walter Rauff's crimes were not in dispute. His role in the development and deployment of the gas wagon was documented in captured German military records introduced at Nuremberg. He had signed correspondence approving technical modifications to improve the killing capacity of the vehicles. He had overseen their deployment in Serbia, the Soviet Union, and North Africa. When the war ended, he used Vatican rat lines to reach Syria in 1948, worked briefly in the Middle East, moved to Ecuador, and finally settled in Chile in 1958, where he lived without meaningful concealment. What gave Rauff his protection was not invisibility, but utility. Chilean investigators and journalists later established that Rauff had worked as an operative for the Chilean secret police, the DINA, under the Pinochet government. He had, reportedly, also maintained connections with West German intelligence services, providing value to Cold War security apparatus on multiple sides. In 1963, the Chilean Supreme Court formally refused West Germany's extradition request, citing the statute of limitations under Chilean law. It refused again in 1983, the same ruling, the same legal shield. Simon Wiesenthal tracked Rauff for decades. Israeli intelligence reportedly assessed and ultimately abandoned a capture operation modeled on the Eichmann abduction, concluding that the diplomatic complications in post-Eichmann Latin America made a repeat operation unfeasible. West Germany renewed its warrant and pressed Chile repeatedly. None of it moved the Chilean judiciary. Ralph died of lung cancer in Santiago on May 14, 1984. He was never extradited. He was never tried. He died a free man in a country that had decided his crimes were simply too old to prosecute. Walter Ralph's case is the entry in this countdown, where the system did not bend, did not catch up, and did not deliver. He understood something that other fugitives did not, that legal systems have expiration dates, and that surviving long enough is, sometimes, its own acquittal. He was right. The reckoning never came. And the 100,000 people killed by his vehicles had no memorial delivered by any court, anywhere, ever. Number 3, the bureaucrat who became a ghost. On the night of May 11, 1960, a team of Mossad agents stationed themselves near a bus stop on Garibaldi Street in San Fernando, a suburb of Buenos Aires. They were waiting for a man named Ricardo Clement, a quiet, thin-faced German immigrant who worked at a local Mercedes-Benz plant and walked home from the bus stop each evening at the same time. When Clement appeared, the agents seized him, bundled him into a car, and drove to a safe house. One agent asked him in German if he had ever served in the German military. The man replied quietly that he was Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann held the rank of SS Obersturmbannführer and served as head of the Gestapo's Section 4B4, the office responsible for coordinating the deportation of Jews from across occupied Europe to the extermination camps. Historians and the Yad Vashem Memorial Authority describe him as the central logistical architect of the Holocaust's machinery of murder. He organized train schedules, negotiated with local authorities, resolved bureaucratic obstacles, and ensured the systematic deportation of millions of people to their deaths. He was, in Hannah Arendt's later phrase, the terrifying embodiment of the banality of evil. After the war, Eichmann escaped via Odessa rat lines, entered Argentina in 1950 under the name Ricardo Clement, and settled with his family in San Fernando. He was undone not by surveillance technology or an intelligence breakthrough, but by an almost unimaginably improbable chain of coincidence. Fritz Bauer, West Germany's Attorney General, received a tip from Lothar Hermann, a blind Holocaust survivor living in Argentina, whose teenage daughter had been dating a young man who turned out to be Eichmann's son. Hermann recognized the family name. Bauer passed the intelligence to Israel's Mossad. The Mossad operation, approved by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, abducted Eichmann and smuggled him to Israel aboard an El Al flight on May 20th, 1960. His trial began in Jerusalem on April 11th, 1961, presided over by Judge Moshe Landau. It was broadcast internationally and became a defining event in the public documentation of the Holocaust. Eichmann was convicted on all 15 counts against him. He was hanged on May 31st, 1962, the only civil execution carried out in the state of Israel's history. If a blind man in a Buenos Aires suburb had not recognized a name his daughter mentioned at dinner, would the man who scheduled the trains to Auschwitz have died quietly in Argentina? Unremarkable and unmourned, like so many others. The answer, given everything we know about how close the trail came to going cold, is almost certainly yes. Eichmann was caught not because the system was reliable. He was caught because, for once, chance broke the right way. Number 2, the angel of death who drowned free. On February 7th, 1979, a man named Wolfgang Gerhard suffered a stroke while swimming at Bertioga Beach, near Sao Paulo, Brazil, and drowned in the shallow surf. He was buried in a local cemetery under that name. The world's most sophisticated intelligence agencies, multiple national governments, and the relentless investigators of the Simon Wiesenthal Center had been hunting him for 3 decades. It would take 6 more years, and a Brazilian police exhumation in 1985 for anyone to establish that Wolfgang Gerhard had actually been Josef Mengele, the SS physician known as the Angel of Death. Josef Mengele served as a physician at Auschwitz-Birkenau from 1943 to 1945. His crimes are among the most extensively documented of the entire war. He conducted lethal, pseudoscientific experiments on prisoners, with particular focus on twins and children, injecting subjects with infectious agents, performing surgery without anesthesia, and recording results with the methodical detachment of someone who had reclassified human beings as laboratory material. He personally stood on the arrival ramp at Auschwitz and directed prisoners, with a gesture, left or right, toward forced labor or immediate death in the gas chambers. He did this, by documented account, with an air of almost cheerful calm. Mengele fled to Argentina in 1949 using Odessa rat lines. He initially lived in Buenos Aires, obtained Paraguayan citizenship in 1959, and moved to Brazil in 1960. He spent years sheltered by a German-Brazilian couple, the Stammer family, who knew his true identity and said nothing. West Germany issued an arrest warrant in 1959. Interpol sought him. The Simon Wiesenthal Center offered substantial rewards. The Israeli Mossad, fresh from the Eichmann operation, made him a priority. None of it worked. He was never close to being caught. He swam in the ocean, suffered a stroke, and drowned before any of them reached him. Brazilian police exhumed remains from the Embu das Artes cemetery in 1985 after investigators finally connected the Wolfgang Gerhard identity to Mengele's movements. Forensic anthropologists confirmed the identification through skeletal analysis. In 1992, a full DNA comparison using samples provided by Mengele's son Rolf produced a definitive genetic confirmation. The most hunted man alive had been dead for 6 years by the time his hunters knew where to find him. Josef Mengele, who directed the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people with a casual wave of his hand on the ramp at Auschwitz, was taken not by any court, not by any intelligence service, but by a stroke and a current in the Brazilian surf. The reckoning that came was delivered not to a man, but to bones in a cemetery, and it arrived 17 years too late to matter to anyone except the record. His case is the most complete failure of post-war justice in this countdown, and yet it is not the most haunting. Number 1. Dr. Death's 30-Year Disappearing Act. In January 2009, the New York Times and the German public broadcaster ZDF jointly published the results of an investigation that stunned historians, prosecutors, and the surviving investigators who had spent careers searching for the man in question. Aribert Heim, an SS physician at Mauthausen concentration camp, and the individual ranked by the Simon Wiesenthal Center as the world's most wanted Nazi war criminal, had not been hiding in South America or Spain, as investigators had long assumed. He had been living in Cairo, Egypt, as a Muslim convert named Tariq Farid Hussein, and he had been dead since August 10, 1992. Aribert Heim's crimes at Mauthausen, documented in the testimony of survivors and recorded in post-war German judicial proceedings, represent some of the most depraved acts committed by any individual in the war crimes record. He administered lethal injections of petrol and phenol directly into prisoners' hearts, removed organs from living patients without anesthesia to time how long they survived, and kept the prepared skull of at least one victim as a display. Austrian and German prosecutors documented a minimum of 86 direct murders, though investigators and the Simon Wiesenthal Center placed the true figure significantly higher. He was the subject of active arrest warrants in both Austria and West Germany. In 1962, a friend with a connection to German law enforcement tipped Heim off that police were coming to Baden-Baden to question him. He left his house, drove away, and never came back. For 30 years, the investigation assumed he had followed the standard rat line south, and search operations focused on Argentina, Chile, and Spain. His bank accounts in Germany, containing substantial funds, went largely untouched, which investigators interpreted as a sign he had died or was inaccessible. In fact, he had converted to Islam, changed his name, and built a quiet, observant life in Cairo's Garden City neighborhood, living modestly and leaving almost no trace. The breakthrough came from a hotel storage room. Journalists Nick Kulish and Suad McKinnett, investigating for the New York Times, discovered documents in Cairo that Heim had left behind, including personal diaries, correspondence with his son Rolf, and tax documents. These papers confirmed his identity, his conversion, his daily life, and the date of his death from rectal cancer on August 10, 1992. His son Rolf confirmed the identification publicly in 2009. The German Federal Criminal Police closed their file. The Simon Wiesenthal Center removed his name from their most wanted list. Albert Heim understood something that separated him from every other fugitive in this countdown. He did not hide behind a false name badly maintained or an arrogant assumption of safety. He chose patience, a new faith, a new name, and a new continent, and he waited. He outlasted every investigator assigned to find him, every reward offered for his capture, and every technological advance in the 30-year hunt. He died in his bed, in a city no one thought to look in, 17 years before anyone came looking there. The documents he left in a Cairo hotel storage room are the closest thing to a trial he ever faced, and they found him only after death had already beaten justice to him by nearly 2 decades. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.